Hello. So I'm currently in the music library as my roommate decided that now would be the best time to be on the phone for 2 hours straight, and Noble and Hayden are both full. However, we're here and we're recording. So I guess hello, welcome to my official unofficial podcast. I feel like I'm having a very sensual ASMR experience with you right now, but we're gonna continue on. Main topic of discussion today is analog horror, and pretty much what is it, right? What makes it good? What makes it bad? What makes it effective, right? And the reason why I picked analog horror is whenever I ask you personally, the person listening to this, to think of horror, right? Think of conventional horror. Your mind probably goes to slashers or supernatural or demonic possession or even zombie movies for some people. But analog horror is something that's very much so tucked away, and I'm talking about it. I'm talking about why it's different, right? Pretty much for those that are unaware, analog horror is essentially something that's shrouded in the mystery of CRTVs and VHS tapes, stuff that is analog media, stuff like that. And it's only really blown up recently, within the past I would say 3-4 years. And I primarily say that it's because of the internet, and the ability to show these older forms of media through a mass spread platform such as the internet, is what helps attribute to what makes it so great, right? We weren't able to really do that with a lot of other movies. You'd have to go out to the movie theaters and sit down, buy a ticket, buy popcorn, stuff like that. But analog horror is so incredibly accessible, and that's intentional, right? I'm gonna be going over that later. But again, for those who don't know what analog horror is, it's a horror-based story, right? And it follows a lot of normal horror tropes, paranormal activity, demonic possession, otherworldly creatures. Sometimes it'll just take our literal history and retell it in a different way, right? And again, this is not something new. We know that these genres come from a lot of other horror-based mediums, right? And it borrows a lot of tropes, specifically from psychological horror as well. But it borrows a lot of these tropes. And it follows through with a lot of the same ideas of summoning a type of evil, a mysterious neighbor, or my favorite thing while I was researching this is something we call the everything monster. And whenever we say the everything monster, that means literally everything is the monster, right? And think of normal people being included with a bigger form of an actual monster in the film, right? It's something that is so incredibly large that we can't even comprehend it. Anyways, but a lack of communication, being alone, or the nightmare that might have been real. Those are a lot of tropes that are very, very popular with analog horror, right? And I know that whenever I say that, we're probably thinking oh well, what makes analog horror so interesting? Why should we even care about it if it's just ripping off these other genres? But the thing that makes it so incredibly different, right, is the means in which it's told in, right? I kind of brought this up earlier, but it's a lot of these stories, right, if not all of them, are told through some older form of media, right? VHS tapes, found footage, sometimes old video game platforms, and then whenever you look at digital horror, something that I will talk about later, with digital horror, it's these old Flash websites, right? It's stuff that is essentially now outdated, right? So it's like, at what line is digital and analog horror different, and what line is it the same, right? But the ideas of like these older forms of media date all the way back like to like the Blair Witch Project, right? Which was like January 23rd, 1999, right? And it was like the first real step that we had towards quote unquote analog horror, right? That found footage, and again, it really like catapulted this subgenre of horror. And the thing that set this film apart from all the other ones that were coming out before it was the marketing, right? The marketing, and then also the way the actual movie was shot, right? And like I love talking about this film's the way it was marketed, because I think it's so cool, because I don't think I've seen any other movie even come close to being this cool, right? So what they did was, like, instead of like, you know, just giving like snippets of the film or like whatever, they decided that they would post like fake interviews of people talking about like these 3 missing students, and they like filed like these like fake police reports and put them up on like posters and like actually hung them up. Of course, this was like local to the area, because this was originally it was for like a film festival, right? But they put them up around like the town, right? And whenever you would like click on like, or not click, but whenever you'd go to like the link, it would lead you to the actual website where, you know, it would like have images of these actors with like, you know, their families or like information about them, and it was missing information. Or like even when you went to the official IMDb page, right? Because, you know, it's a movie. The actors under their little like names, it would say that they were missing, presumed dead, right? And that was literally for the entire first year of the movie being out. And I think that is so cool, right? It's like, it was interactable, it was something tangible, right? And like, you know, again, I'm just gonna TLDR, if you weren't paying attention, I have this quote from Williamson. The filmmakers behind the Blair Witch Project built up the hype for the film by trying to fool people into thinking the film was real. Missing persons posters and fake police reports were created and shared all over the internet to build up suspicion as to whether the film's contents were real or not. And I think that what makes this so effective, again, is this thing real or not, right? Again, I will be talking about this later, but it does it so incredibly well, right? It creates like a lot of suspicion and paranoia and doubt inside of the audience's head, right? Is this movie real? What happened to the actors, right? What is this movie? And I guess you can also say this was like kind of a pseudo ARG, right? Which is something that is a very large staple of analog horror now, right? Is these very pseudo ARG like elements, right? And like the idea of interactable media, right, specifically horror-based media, comes from, you know, creepypastas on the internet, and kind of just like expanding on the idea of like creepypastas and ARGs, right? They go hand in hand, right? They can be exclusive to each other, but whenever you combine them together, it helps strengthen both of them, right? If, for those who don't know what creepypastas or ARGs are, ARGs is an acronym. It stands for Augmented Reality Game, right? So it's normally something that's on the internet, and you know, there'll be like little breadcrumbs and stuff like that. You know, like a video or a link, and it'll lead you to another video or link, and it doesn't necessarily have to be horror based, but it's just something it's grounded in the real world, right? There may be elements that are from the real world, but it doesn't have to be horror based. And creepypastas, right? The other thing that goes hand in hand with this are pretty much scary stories that got spread around mostly through the internet, right? And it's kind of a play on the word of copy and paste and copy pasta. You know, we all know what copy and pasting is on a computer, right? Control C, Control V. And a copy pasta was kind of like a meme, like a pseudo meme on the internet, where it was just a funny text that you would copy and you'd paste, and it was called a copy pasta, right? And creepypasta is a play off of that, where it's a creepy story, right? So you take a creepy story and you tell your friends about it, right? Or like, it would have like that kind of like chain mail kind of thing, where it's like, oh, if you don't send this to 10 friends, he's gonna come get you in your sleep, right? Type of thing. And pretty much the interactability, right, of ARGs and creepypastas, when you combine them together, it makes creepypastas seem more real. It makes them feel tangible, right? And one very large example I want to talk about is Petscop, which for those who don't know, Petscop is it's an internet series, right? It's a bit of a touchy topic. Some people disagree with me on this, but some people say that it's an ARG. Some people say it's just a creepypasta. I say it's both. But pretty much it's a YouTube series that it's pretty much this guy playing through this video game called Petscop. And Petscop is not a real game. You cannot play Petscop, right? But you wouldn't get that off of first impression, right? And as he goes through the playthrough, things become more corrupted and more like messed up, right? All of a sudden there's like a dead girl in there, right? And it's like, that's not supposed to be there. That's a real person that's in this video game, right? And it has this like, that's like, stereotypical of like creepypastas. It's a creepy story, right? But what makes this stand up and elevated is the fact that it has ARG elements in it, right? Where there are little like notes, there are little messages that are left behind in the video, like throughout the bugs and the glitches, right? And even the fact that it's on a YouTube page, right, that is exclusively meant for Petscop within itself is interactable and tangible. And I think that adds a lot, right? Very similar to the Blair Witch Project, where it doesn't just feel like a piece of media, it feels like something that is truly tangible, right? I have this quote from Malinsky right here. This is from it's an article that pretty much talks about analog horror. It's like a pretty cool source. I'll have like a sites page if you want to check it out. I think you recommended this one to me though, so quote unquote. And that's actually a key part of these web series. There's a puzzle to solve. Like, the videos are dropped online with just enough breadcrumbs for you to follow and kind of figure out what the grand conspiracy behind these videos that are actually supposed to be found after being lost for decades, right? And it's like, Petscop, it never gives itself away to being fake, and, it creates a lot of paranoia and insecurity with the audience receiving the information, right? It gives these breadcrumbs, and we're, as a group, as an audience, figuring out this quote-unquote, grand conspiracy. The whole idea of like interactability and loss of information is what makes analog horror so great, right? Not just the means in which it's told. That's something that I find is very, very much so exclusive to analog and digital horror. This is a quote from Cock, right? No analog horror narrative ever gives its viewers all the answers. It is up to us to piece together the shards we are given, and ultimately to decide what the series means for us and what our reaction to the fear and ambiguity says about our place in the world, right? And that's kind of like that bigger, grand scale kind of idea of analog horror, right? It's like, what does us not knowing everything say about us, right? Are we really as big as we think as humans? But progressing forward to the modern age of analog horror, past the Blair Witch Project, we get a lot of series that start being hosted on YouTube, right? This is pre-Petscop, by the way. I realize I'm telling this out of order, right? This is pre-Petscop. Actually, this is the Petscop era. My bad. But this is the Petscop era. this is where a lot of these series are hosted on YouTube and spread through other social medias as Twitter and like Tumblr, where they accumulate like a fan base, right? And one of the first modern examples of analog horror is a series called Local 58 TV. And this is a series that focuses on trying its best to like recreate like an old news channel that like, you know, is like local to a town, right? And like the series is actually a spin-off of a previous creepypasta, Candle Cove. And I'm not gonna talk too much about Candle Cove, but I feel like it's important to realize what Candle Cove is, right? And again, this is not analog horror, but it's a creepypasta, right? And it was pretty much it was a fake form that had a fan base, right, of this show called Candle Cove, right? And it was this fake fan base on this fake form, recalling how like disturbing this TV show was. And like there's a character that's like a skeleton that's like steals children's skin, and it like turns out that there was no TV, it was just TV static, right? And again, playing off the ambiguity of like, was this real, was it not, right? Is Candle Cove even a real thing? Again, creepypasta. And like the idea of like disturbing TV, right? And like what is real, what is not? Are we just watching TV static? Was brought to Local 58, right? And the idea behind Local 58 is that it's a normal TV broadcast. This is the first episode, by the way. I'm just describing the first episode. Is that it's like a normal TV show, or like it's like an emergency broadcast, right, on like the news, and it has like, you know, the sirens and like the messed up quality and all that, right? And it pretty much like has like a meteor warning saying, don't go outside, like be cautious, it's all the way until sunset, and then it fades to black, right? It just cuts black, and it's like, what happened? And then it comes back. But this time, the warning is lifted, and it's a message demanding the viewer to go look outside, to look at the moon, right? And that's terrifying. And then it cuts again, and then it comes back and says, we'll all look at it together. And then it cuts to a photo of the moon with people screaming in the background, and that's terrifying, right? Again, the idea of like, we don't know everything, right? This is episode 1. We don't even know what Local 58 is, right? And this idea of just like being like launched into like this new world that doesn't abide to the same rules that we abide to is strange. It's weird, right? And it's also like this quote unquote like everything monster, right? And it's like, we don't know what the monster is. Is the TV station itself the monster? Is there some otherworldly power? Is it the moon itself? What is it, right? It could be everything and nothing at the same time, right? And again, that's what makes it so great. Another quote from Malinsky here, because Malinsky actually goes over Local 58, which I think is great, quote unquote. And it's supposed to be found footage from an old local TV station. There's no actors or dialogue. The viewers are just seeing little conflicting messages from the official station of like contingency plans for a foreign invasion that may or may not be hoaxes. Like it's a lot of announcement screens, and they also use an emergency broadcast signal, which terrified me as a kid. You know, and the idea of like being terrified as a kid plays so well for older generations, right, who were grown up with this type of like technology, right? And I remember like, even with me being 19, I remember being terrified of these emergency broadcast signals. I would occasionally get them, you know, it'd be like almost midnight and then I'd get one and I was terrified, right? But it can also go the opposite way. And this is a quote from Alex Hara. Alex Hara was brought onto Malinsky's podcast and was asked about analog horror. And this is the quote. The third main reason is that there is always a sense of mystery about analog technology that exists in analog horror because they didn't grow up in it, or they only very vaguely remember it when they were very young. And obviously it's from a completely different time period, a completely different world. Literally just the infrastructure of, you know, towns and cities, the ideas that you couldn't instantly communicate with anyone you wanted to. You couldn't instantly find out where someone was, right? Again, this whole idea of like otherworldliness that comes with analog, or, you know, clouded memories, right? And it's, you know, it's the opposite of connecting us to the media that we consume. It disconnects us from the media that we consume, and you can see, it goes both ways. It goes to both extremes. Another series I want to bring up with in the modern age is particularly the Mandela Catalog. The Mandela Catalog is one that plays into the whole found footage VHS tape approach, right? One that we've seen from the Blair Witch Project, right? Snippets and cuts. You know, again, lack of information, fuzzy, sometimes even fully distorted videos where we only have audio to play off of, right? And that's terrifying. But the point of the Mandela Catalog is that there is this, I don't even know if I can call it an everything monster, because we do know what it is, but it's the monsters are called alternates or doppelgangers, right? And they look similar to people. They don't look quite like people, but they look similar. And there's something that's always off or distorted about them, right? It's either like one eye is bigger than the other one, or their head's a little bit too large, or stuff like that, right? And to me, that already is just scary, right? Thinking about a person who doesn't quite look right. That sounds absolutely horrifying, right? But their whole shtick, right? Their whole thing is that they're able to manipulate media in real time, right? And the entire point of them being able to do that is that they drive a person to insanity and make them commit suicide. And I think that as an idea, like as a monster, is so incredibly cool, right? That's something that's so unique, and I feel like can only truly be done through analog horror, right? Because it's the means at which we're watching it is being manipulated in real time, and it creates so much doubt. Is the media that we're watching right now being manipulated? Are we falling victim to alternates, right? It really pulls us in to the media that we're consuming. And then afterwards, like after this person commits suicide, they will try their best to impersonate the person that they just killed, right? And then it keeps going. The whole idea that alternates are trying to take over our world, and it, you know, it's like this otherworldly power that humanity has no defense against, right? And again, I think this is just a great series that you should watch. The Mandela Catalog is, there's so much more in it that I have not talked about, but I highly recommend you watching it. So now that we kind of have like an idea of modern and pre-existing analog horror, right? I kind of want to dig into digital horror, because I've been talking about it quite a bit. But like, what is digital horror, right? And digital horror essentially is, I don't want to call it the polar opposite of analog horror, but it's more like a distant cousin, right? And it's their opposite in the ways that they portray information, but their contents are very similar, right? And in the way that analog horror is shrouded in mystery and not necessarily giving us all the answers, and like, oh, well, I may or may not be looking at something the intended way. Digital horror actually goes the opposite direction and tells us concisely what we're looking at, and it's extremely clear, right? And instead of like with analog horror, things change off screen where we can't really see it, digital horror shows us straight to our face. It shows us what's being changed, right? And I think that is more terrifying than analog horror, right? Because it shows that, like, oftentimes these monsters are very meta and self-aware, more so than in analog horror, right? And it shows that these monsters don't even respect the audience, right? It shows that, like, you are powerless, you are a human, right? And that's so good, right? That's so effective, right? It reminds us that we're human, because I feel like as humanity has like gone on, we've been like, oh, we're the best primates, right? We're at the top of the food tree, right? No, there's something more powerful than us, right? And that's something that's seen with like alien movies, right? Is that there's something more intelligent than us, and that's terrifying. One example of digital horror that I primarily want to talk about, mostly because it scared me as a child, is Undertale. And Undertale is not inherently digital horror. It's not a horror game whatsoever. It has moments where it will become horror, but it's all up to the user, right? And the entire point of Undertale is that it's a commentary on the whole idea of RPG video games, right? The whole idea behind RPGs being that, like, you're supposed to be grinding out levels and, like, killing monsters and staying in the same area until you get leveled up enough. But the whole point of Undertale is that you actually don't have to do that. You can spare these monsters, right? Every single monster can be spared in some capacity in this game, and that's what makes it so good, right? It flips the whole idea of what an RPG is, and it rewards the player for not giving in to killing monsters, right? It's actually encouraged for you to spare them. However, if you choose to ignore the idea of sparing and opt in to killing every single character and monster in the game, you're confronted at the end of the game, right? The game becomes progressively more disturbing the more you kill, right? The music eventually goes away. Instead of like cute little messages, it will just give you a counter of how many monsters are left, right? Instead of like, you feel safe and warm here, it's just 33 people remaining. That's so scary, right? But you get, at the end of the game, right, after you finish your run, you get confronted with this character, and her name is Kara. And Kara is a character that acts in a way that's very similar to other monsters in digital horror, right? She's very meta. She's aware that we are playing a game, and she addresses us, the person playing the game, right? Not the character, right? And she states that we are the monsters, not her, right? And then she has like this really like big jump scare, right? And she crashes the game itself, right? And this is something that Deltarune does a lot. It will literally crash your game because it's meta, right? And like every time that we open the game, we are confronted with Kara. We're not allowed to go back to the normal game, and she will ask us if we have learned yet. If we say no, you go into the same loop, jump scare followed by a game crash. But if we say yes, you're forced to delete the save file, right? This would be all fine and dandy if it was any other game that's not self-aware, but sorry, library's creaking. But with this game, if you delete a file, the game remembers, and the characters are aware in the fact that they are in the game, right? And they will remind you that you are a monster, right? And one of the like catalysts of this is Flowey, who's a flower, and he's aware of save states. And like, if you kill the first boss by accident and then delete your file and go back, he will call you out for it. He'll be like, "You felt so bad killing her, didn't you? You're a monster." And it's completely unforgivable, right? And it really brings a lot of doubt onto us. Another like series I kind of want to touch about, I'm not going to go too much into it, as it's not on like my notes of things to talk about. Doki Doki Literature Club, which is inherently digital horror. It plays off a lot of creepypasta kind of ideas, right? It's a game that disguises itself as being a like cutesy like anime dating sim, right? Like something that is I don't want to say for no lives, but it's, it disguises itself as one of those games, right? Where you're, oh, I'm in high school and, I'm dating these like 4 senior girls that are totally of age, right? Very degenerate in nature. And, oftentimes people on the internet would say like, oh, I wish these girls were real. I wish I could really date them. I wish they like really loved me, right? And the game, it really plays into that, right? And, it eventually has points in which the characters literally kill themselves, right? Through data manipulation. And the main monster from the game, her name is Monica, right? She is the head of the literature club. she forces the other characters to kill themselves by deleting their files off of your computer. You literally have to open up your files of the game and delete files, right? And there's a bunch of like little Easter eggs within the game. Again, a lot of these ARG elements, right? And it's meta, right? It's really meta. This character is aware of the file manipulation. And again, that's just something that makes digital horror different than analog horror. Digital horror, from what I've noticed, tends to be a lot more meta. That's not to say that analog horror isn't meta. It can be meta at times, but digital horror definitely does it a lot more. And again, it reminds us that we're human, right? It reminds us that we are the ones who are in control of like our computers, right? But it's like, what happens when the internet becomes sentient, you know? And pretty much like these two extremes, right, are what make analog and digital horror so effective, right? Either putting the audience in a position that's extremely cloudy and grounding us deep within its story, or one that like disconnects us entirely, right? And it reminds us that we're watching something, but the story is aware of itself. And the one thing that these genres do that other genres don't do is that we normally have characters acting out actions for the audience, right? We normally have like somebody to root for, somebody to look at. We become the actors, we become the characters, right? And again, that's something that's just so terrifying, right? Either actually no, just like we're directly stated as characters, and I think that, you know, it really grounds us. And like these two extremes, they like create like this image of the media that we consume. And I was kind of talking about this earlier, where what happens if the internet becomes sentient, right? What happens if we are not the most intelligent things on the earth? What if there's some higher power, right? And it kind of plays off of this fear of like, you know, quote unquote, like robots taking over and like the everything monster. And like, you know, like what if the media that we consume on the internet is aware of us and we can't escape it, or it can't escape us, right? It's just so large, right? It's so large that we cannot run away from it. And like with analog horror, right, it plays off of like those things that are very small scale, like things that you don't fully remember, right? It's like, what if that TV show that you watched was something messed up? What if it was TV static? What if that face that you saw as a kid was real? What if that show was vastly more morbid, right? What did the world look like before the internet and before our modern day technology? And like, what if it was more terrifying than we remember it, right? And I feel like that is what makes analog horror so great. So anyways, I'm at 32 minutes and I feel like you are probably getting tired of listening to me talk. So this is going to be John signing off on my little podcast about analog horror. Thank you for listening, and have yourself a good one.